The most important elections bill in the North Carolina General Assembly this year is not an elections bill. That's the expert assessment from Dr. Andy Jackson. He is the director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. And Andy, you take a look at all kinds of elections bills, but one that you see that has particular implications for elections, as you said in your headline, not really an elections bill. Tell us what you're talking about.
Well, elections bills are in Chapter 163 of the North Carolina statutes. That's all the bills about elections, how to handle elections, election laws in general. But what happens if you pass a bill, you pass a law, you have it in the books, but you can't actually enforce it because of a collusive lawsuit settlement that the Attorney General enters into. He goes ahead and essentially strikes the law down through this collusive settlement. And what I mean by collusive settlement is where the two sides, the Attorney General side and whoever's suing, don't really disagree on policy. They both think that this particular law may be a bad idea, and so they enter into the settlement. And if that happens, then no matter what election law you pass, it's not going to be enforced. And so it kind of makes all your attempts about fixing the system null and void.
And this is not just theory. We saw this happen in 2020.
Yes, it was. Yeah. What happened is the North Carolina State Board of Elections, represented by Josh Stein's North Carolina Department of Justice attorneys, entered into a settlement with Mark Elias, who is a famous Democratic attorney. He sues North Carolina regularly. In this particular lawsuit, they entered into an agreement that affected, among other things, the deadline for accepting absentee ballots and a few other measures. And by doing so, they invalidated a law that was passed by the General Assembly. Now, the General Assembly entered into that lawsuit as intervening defendants, is what it's called. And so they were defendants in the lawsuit. However, Josh Stein's attorneys never consulted them about this settlement. So they were essentially cut out of the loop.
And so one thing that this new bill would do is address that sort of situation. This is called Senate Bill 360. You've talked about changing the way these collusive settlements can go forward. Does this bill address your concerns?
It does. So as I mentioned previously, already on the books, if there's any kind of lawsuit that would strike down a North Carolina law or part of the North Carolina Constitution, leaders of the General Assembly can enter as intervening defendants. They can basically say, well, if you're suing about this law, you're suing us as well, even if they're not named defendants, which is important. So they were defendants in that settlement that happened, but they were not allowed to actually be a party to the settlement. This law would actually say that if the district attorney is handling a lawsuit in which the intervening defendants from the General Assembly are defendants, have intervened, that they have to be consulted before that settlement is entered into. And that should do away with these kind of collusive lawsuits where you're cutting the General Assembly out of the picture.
Because if there's going to be a settlement, the General Assembly would have to sign off on it. They can't have this backdoor arrangement where they have no part in it.
Right. That's essentially what would happen. And they have that in a couple of clauses there in the lawsuit, and they put it actually in the section of law that deals with the North Carolina Department of Justice, just to make sure that folks from the North Carolina Department of Justice know that it's in there.
Now, we're talking about a bill that has implications for elections, but there is actually at least one other major bill that does deal more specifically with elections. This is Senate Bill 326. You've looked at that. What do you think about that bill?
It's a pretty good bill. It covers several bases. It deals with handling the deadline for receiving absentee ballots. North Carolina right now, it's 3 days after the election. Most states, it's by election day. And this would kind of make North Carolina part of the norm. We would have our absentee ballots accepted on election day. Also, it would expand the time that you have between the time you request an absentee ballot to the time you before Election Day from 7 days to 14 days. And this is keeping with recommendations from the United States Post Office that said you really should have about 15 days, 2 weeks between the time you request a ballot and the time you expect to send it in. That's a good thing. It also prevents county boards of elections from accepting private donations in order to administrate election services. And I think most people would see where this could potentially go awry if you're going to have groups selectively funding county boards of elections. So, for example, there was this one group that passed out so-called Zuck Bucks because they had a lot of donations from Zuckerberg and his wife, and that went to 33 counties, which means 67 counties did not receive any money, any grants from that organization. And I did analysis, and there was actually a vote difference between the counties that took it and the counties that didn't. The counties that accepted the money tended to go vote more on the Democratic side, and the counties that were not granted this money tended to vote more Republican. So how would people feel, like, for example, if the Koch brothers decided, well, we're going to be privately funding election organizations as well? So I think we don't want to get in that kind of arms race between the conservative and progressive sides in this, so it's better just to cut that totally out of the process.
And I know you also like the fact that this bill would include some funding to help people get voter IDs.
It would. It's $5 million, a one-time thing to help folks that, for whatever reason, can't get their documentation together. They need some assistance getting voter IDs. This was one of a series of kind of step backs that we've had in the voter ID law. For example, before you couldn't accept welfare IDs, like some kind of public assistance IDs. Well, after a law that was passed last year, now you can. And this is kind of another step to kind of mollify critics of the ID bill and kind of get rid of all excuses about why we should have opposition to it. Really is a kind of a common sense law.
Well, those are provisions of Senate Bill 326, which actually is an elections bill. But as we said at the top, the headline of the blog post at the Locker Room blog is "The most important elections bill in the General Assembly this year is not an elections bill." Its author is Dr. Andy Jackson, director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity at the John Locke Foundation. Thanks so much.
Thank you.